Universal Disclosure Podcast honorably welcomes Mr. Timothy Hogan, the Grandmaster of the Knights Templar.
Meeting at the Luxor Hotel in Las Vegas. It was being directed by Alan Holt, who was the director, one of the directors of NASA at the time, and he brought in like 40 of us, and basically said, "Look, we're going to tell you everything we know about UFOs at the time, in exchange for you to do some remote viewing for us." And basically what they wanted to know is when should we expect mass contact in terms of a mass contact presence coming down. And I mean, I've worked on a number of top secret projects. I used to work for the space labs up in Boulder, Colorado, but I do know that was one of his early proposals, and I've read actually his proposal on it. So then later, in the 90s, to be brought in for this UFO, I mean, it wasn't really a disclosure. It was a disclosure to the 40 of us that were brought in to do the remote viewing. So, well, some of them are just closed to the public, flat out, completely closed to the public. But the reason why is the hieroglyphs on the inside depict scenes of, the way I like to say it is, it's all consciousness consciously becoming more conscious, right? We're living in this consciousness field. And I believe, just from my own exercises in interactions with UAPs over the years, they definitely have some sort of a consciousness technology interface. We just opened we got the opportunity to go into a tomb in the Valley of the Kings that hadn't been opened in like 70 years, and probably less than 24 people had ever been in this tomb. And what's interesting about the tomb is I will tell you that when we do those initiations in the Great Pyramid, how we put this, whenever we do these initiations, it's not uncommon for that to happen.
With you and your team being approached by NASA to do remote viewing, specifically for what year is open contact. I know you said that they didn't give you the results, and that's kind of understand how that part works. But you personally, I'm curious, what date did you come up with, if you don't mind sharing that?
I came up with May.
Is there anything else that you might want to toss out there with us here that you've never ever said anywhere publicly?
Yeah, I mean,
The following program is presented for general information, education and entertainment purposes only, and is not intended to be advice of any kind. The content, views, thoughts and opinions expressed in this program are those of the individuals involved. The use of information on this program is at the user's own discretion.
And welcome one and all, wherever and whenever you may be. This is Universal Disclosure, meeting the moment. My name is Mike, an active UFO/UAP field investigator in Southern California, with my friend and co-host,
Reverend Stu in Melbourne, Australia.
Reverend Stu, this is it, the big ending, as it were, right? This is episode officially number 25, and this is going to be our grand finale of season 1.
Ah, grand finale. What an appropriate phrase, considering our amazing guest today.
Exactly, and I can't think of anyone better, quite frankly, to sort of end our first season with than Mr. Timothy Hogan, the Grandmaster of the Knights Templar.
Okay, so I'm going to be particularly interested in this because I've got a background in esoteric studies and knowledge, and I really like how this intersects and informs the whole UAP UFO phenomena and research. So this is very welcome here.
Yeah, so we're going to try to weave a conversation of UFOs and Templar history, sort of weaving it. And we're obviously going to be talking about some ancient things, but we're also going to be talking about some pretty not so ancient things too.
Oh, interesting. I can't wait to see the direction this conversation goes in.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one for sure. So for those who don't know, Timothy Hogan is an author and lecturer within the Western Mystery School tradition. He is a past master with several different spiritual traditions, including many bodies in Freemasonry, both AF and AM, and of Rosicrucian lineages. He is a Grandmaster for multiple Knights Templar lineages and runs the Templar Collegia. Timothy Hogan has lectured all over the world in both public and private venues, including as a guest speaker at universities and U.S. embassies, and has appeared on numerous television programs worldwide, as well as multiple podcasts and radio interviews. He is the author of many books: The Alchemical Keys of Masonic Ritual, The 32 Secret Paths of Solomon, Revelation of the Holy Grail, written under the pen name, I hope I'm going to say this right, Chevalier Emery's, I probably said that wrong, apologies, Entering the Chain of Union, The Way of the Templar, Novo Clavis Esoterica, Thoughts from Meditation, and he's the author of The Elements of the Elements. Timothy Hogan has written for several periodicals over the past decade, including L'Initiation, Aradine's Web, Livingstone's Magazine, The New Equinox Journal, The Fraternal Review, The Scottish Rite Journal, and Heerdom. Timothy's books have been translated into Spanish and German, and likewise known for his Track 2 diplomatic meetings with both government and spiritual world leaders. He can also be seen hosting Gaia's Mysteries of the Knights Templar series, and is an expert on Gaia's Ancient Civilizations Season 6, and also hosts Secrets of the Knights Templar by Zohar Stargate Productions, found on YouTube.
Wow, what an absolute wealth of ancient esoteric knowledge. Mike, this is a big deal, and we're greatly graced by his presence on this show today.
Yes, indeed. So, ladies and gentlemen, Universal Disclosure Podcast honorably welcomes Mr. Timothy Hogan, the Grandmaster of the Knights Templar. All right, Timothy, thank you so much for joining us for this visit. We really appreciate your time, and we're looking forward to talking with you.
Yeah, I'm excited to be with you both. You both have a great background, and I think we have some great things we can talk about.
I couldn't agree more. Especially with the common interest, I guess. So we always ask our first time guests the same first question, and that's because Stuart and I met as musicians, and there's a little bit behind that. But what's your favorite song or musical artist, and why?
Well, I'll tell you right now. I can tell you my current favorite band is a band called Gemini Syndrome, and they have Aaron Nordstrom as their lead singer, and they're kind of like, they're a little bit like Tool, but better in my opinion. And the lyrical content is fantastic. Currently, my favorite tune of theirs is the song Reintegration, which is for those who have been in the initiatic path for a while, that might be a concept they've come across. But it's most of the band members are all initiates of one thing or another, and I really love their work right now.
Wow, that's great. I've actually not heard of them, but I'm going to look them up and check it out. It sounds like it's going to be pretty interesting.
Yeah, check it out. You'll like it.
So to get kind of right into it, I want to weave the conversation a little bit between UFOs and Templar history and things like that. But for you personally, what sparked your interest in UFOs?
Oh boy, well, I mean, I think I first saw UFOs when I was pretty young. I first had my first experience of seeing them, but I will say that I started by the age of maybe 22. I've been very actively involved in some Rosicrucian work, and through the ancient mystical order Rosicrucis at the time. And they had in their higher degrees, in their ninth degree, they had pretty explicit instruction on how to contact or reach out psychically to these craft, and they emphasized the fact that these were basically like our space cousins that are out there, and that if they had meant us harm, that they could have destroyed us a long time ago because they're technologically so superior to us. And so that got me more interested in it for sure. And from there, I kind of went on to try those exercises out. They're very similar to some of the work that Stephen Greer does, but a little bit different, but generally the same. And and so it just kind of took off from there, I would say.
Wow, that's really interesting. I had no, I didn't realize that that such a protocol is, I guess, going back a lot longer than what I realized.
Yeah. Well, the at least as far as Amorc is concerned, I mean, I know they've been talking about UFOs. I've found old discourses. I used to be I'm a past master of the Rocky Mountain Lodge for them, and they had discourses going back to the 1930s, talking about flying craft, and so it was very clearly a part of their higher degree structure system. I don't think there's too many. There's not too many people that get to those higher degrees to begin with, but B, the ones who do, I'm sure I've been reluctant to talk about it. So,
yeah, I bet. Yeah. So then, so obviously you've seen UFOs. Have you ever interacted with a non-human entity?
I don't know. There's some speculation that there's a number of non-human entities that are here with us right now. that you could encounter them in the grocery store all the time and not necessarily know it. I will say I did have an experience. So shortly after my involvement in trying to bring down UFOs, and I used to do a lot of remote viewing type of work as well. And I was invited in about 1996 or so to a special meeting at the Luxor Hotel in Las Vegas. It was being directed by Alan Holt, who was one of the directors of NASA at the time, and he brought in like 40 of us and basically said, "Look, we're going to tell you everything we know about UFOs at the time, in exchange for you to do some remote viewing for us." So,
wow.
So we did. I mean, they told us everything we knew. They said there were 5 different classifications of UFOs based on their technological ability. They didn't get into entities as much, but they were mostly focusing on the craft. And they did suspect that, it's possible that some of those craft could be from different civilizations out there, just because they behave so differently. And that some were very clearly, I think the level 5 was basically they could a UFO and or UFO entities could be right next to you and you wouldn't even necessarily know it. They could beam right into your house type of deal. Whereas the level 1 was kind of more of a, I mean, still vastly superior to anything that we have, but was more of a clunker, I guess. Didn't have that type of technology. So I think they were still on the fence on whether they thought they were like all the same civilization, but just levels of technology, or if the different levels of technology were coming from different civilizations. I mean, they didn't get into that as far as we were concerned. But we did do a remote viewing, and basically what they wanted to know is when should we expect mass contact in terms of a mass contact presence coming down. And so the 40 of us, we did our remote viewing. We came up to our consensus on it. We never found out what the I guess the final tally was in terms of what everyone came up with, what the combined consensus was. They kept that from us, but yeah, so we did that. And then I will say, as I left that conference, I was driving from Nevada back to Colorado, and right around just a little bit before Flagstaff, I saw and I had somebody with me in the car with me. We saw there was a craft that was hovering just off the highway, like maybe 50 feet off the highway. And it was about 50 feet in the air, just hovering there. And so I pulled over my car real quick, and we jumped out of the car. We both started running towards it because, I was all about, having some sort of contact connection with them. I will say I don't remember what happened, but sometime after that, I was back in the car with this other guy, and we were just driving. And I don't remember getting back in the car, and I don't remember driving away from it. So I just realized that we were back in the car and driving. And so I had some memory loss there. So it's possible that I may have gone through some sort of an abduction experience, but that I don't know. I'll be totally honest. I don't remember anything. So.
Well, did you recall, was there any type of like a time gap of sorts?
There's definitely a time gap. I mean, there was about a 2-hour time gap that was missing that we just don't know. And it's interesting. The guy who was in the car with me, he we were both like, did that really just happen? It's like we were kind of coming to as I was driving, and we both recalled running towards the craft, but neither of us remember going back and getting back in the car and then driving away. And then we didn't talk about it for like 20 years. But now, I still see him every once in a while, and we still are like, hey, do you remember that? We both remember it. So
it's pretty typical that people hold it in long. So before we get too far ahead, with what you were just saying, did that really just happen? I kind of want to harp on this a little bit, because people might be saying, did you really just say that, in terms of NASA and their involvement? Because I think that's something that we should not just talk about and go to the next thing right away. Just to restate, NASA directly asked you and your team, as it were, to do remote viewing in exchange for them giving you information they have about UFOs, which then means NASA, albeit private at the time, admitted they know about UFOs. They study this. Can we maybe just...
Sure. I mean, I don't know what else I can tell you about it other than, Alan Holt was one of the directors of NASA. He's the one who set it up. There were 3 other NASA officials there, and they showed us slides, and they really, they went through the entire structure of like what each category was in terms of 1 through 5, and as far as technology, and it just had to do with technology, in terms of what they were perceiving the technology to be. I think at the time they thought, well, it wouldn't matter if we told anybody about it because no one would believe us anyways.
Yeah.
But it did take place at I find it interesting that it took place at the Luxor Hotel.
Yeah.
Only because of course, the airport right behind the Luxor Hotel is what takes employees to Area 51.
Yeah.
And we've had some Templar brothers who do work out there at Area 51. They can't really talk about it much, but I know that's how they regularly go to the Luxor Casino, to meet, to then go across the street to the airport and to go out for their jobs. So I don't know if that's why the Luxor Hotel was chosen for that NASA meeting. I don't know. I don't know. All I know is there were 40 of us. They told us everything that they knew at the time, which was quite a bit. Surprisingly, I mean, you got to remember this was 96, so nobody was talking about this stuff officially from a government standpoint, and so I was a little surprised NASA was even involved in it. I do know, as far as Alan Holt's background, though, he had started out as an engineer and developer for NASA. And I can tell you, I had become privy to some of his budget proposals clear back in the 1980s, in which he was proposing a new form of craft that they wanted to design, which basically worked on the principle of you created a electromagnetic energy bottle around the craft, and then you hit it with lasers, and these lasers would create a certain frequency. And the idea was that this spinning energy bottle around the craft would actually cause the craft to relocate at a different point of space-time. And so this is what they were he was trying to get the budget for. This is clear back in the early 80s. So I don't think they ever did that, not to my not to my knowledge. I'm not privy to that. I mean, I've worked on a number of top secret projects. I used to work for the Space Labs up in Boulder, Colorado, but I do know that was one of his early proposals, and I've read actually his proposal on it. So then later, in the 90s, to be brought in for this UFO, I mean, it wasn't really a disclosure. It was a disclosure to the 40 of us that were brought in to do the remote viewing. So yeah, it's interesting. It raises a lot of questions.
Sure does.
Just out of curiosity, did they ask you to sign an NDA, or did they tell you never speak of this again, kind of thing, or was it just pretty informal?
No, it's pretty informal. That was surprising too. I really think they believed that they could give us all of this information and have us do the remote viewing for them. And at the time, they thought, well, even if we told anybody, no one would believe it, So, and I think that's kind of stood until recently. And I don't know anybody else who's come out publicly and talked about it, but it happened. So
that makes sense. And you guys are kind of known for keeping secrets well anyway. Right?
Yeah, sure.
Mike, that's the exact question I was going to ask. And then I was also going to ask, do you hold a security clearance, Timothy?
Yeah, I have in the past. I haven't done any anything for the federal government in that regard in a long time now. So, but back then, it was right around the same time I started also working for the space labs up in Boulder. And at that time, we were working on a top secret project that's now public. It was called the Advanced Composition Explorer Satellite, or the ACE satellite. And it's a satellite that sits at what's known as the L1 point in space, which where the gravity of the sun and the gravity of the earth is equal. So it just sits there in that one spot, and it monitors the sun 24/7. Just sits there and looks at the sun 24/7, and it has different types of cameras. So you can look at X-ray camera or they're looking for different particles, and they're mostly looking for solar flares that could be heading towards the Earth. So they have an early warning system as far as that goes, and so that satellite is looks for space weather, but it also looks for anything going in or coming out of the sun. And and at the time, Space Command was largely one of the main government entities that was involved in it. I don't know now. Since they've declassified it, you can look up Advanced Composition Explorer, and you can look up real-time space weather from the sun now. But that was top secret at the time when I was working on it. So, yeah.
That's very cool. The sun can be considered a Stargate, I guess, in a sense, because it is a star. And I think I know what you're getting at just now.
Yep. I think you hit that right on the head.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's interesting. Some of the ancient texts, like particularly some of the Egyptians and some of the others, they actually referred to the sun as a doorway.
Wow. And
it kind of puts a different spin on a lot of the Egyptian mythology when you look at it that way. And I will say, from a research standpoint, I do a lot of lead tours in Egypt, at least once or twice a year. I got one coming up in February through Templar travel tours. But we do one of the things that we examine is all the major temples in Egypt in their sanctum area, their Holy of Holies area. They all have over the door the hieroglyphs for Stargate.
Oh, wow.
And when some of those areas, when you go in them, well, some of them are just closed to the public, flat out, completely closed to the public. But the reason why is the hieroglyphs on the inside depict scenes of these, they almost look like mirrors with a bunch of stars in them. And then you see the gods, the Nidoru, coming out of that mirror looking thing. I mean, I'm assuming it's the Stargate, and teaching the Pharaoh. I mean, one of them's at like Hatshepsut's funerary temple, in fact, is very well depicted, but you also find it at the Temple of Hathor at Dendera and other places as well. So I don't know if the Egyptians were if there used to be some sort of technology that was set up there that would in which beings were actually coming in and out and communicating with the Pharaoh, or if there was if they were just getting high on something and staring at the wall, at
like scrying
times a year or something, and scrying it. I don't know that I have no clue. There's nothing in there to indicate. Well, if there ever was any technology in there, it's gone now. You can't see it unless it's the building itself. But they all seem to be pointing to different temples were actually aligned with different star constellations. And you could tell some of them were definitely aligned with the Pleiades, whereas others were aligned with Orion, and others were aligned with Sirius. And they ostensibly, these stargates were to connect with those constellations, or potentially beings in those constellations. Again, I don't know, but it very clearly refers to it as stargates. And then the other thing that's interesting too is if you in all the major temples, they have these pillars. They have like a big area where they have a lot of pillars, usually a certain specific number of pillars that has astrological association. But at the base of all the pillars of all these temples in Egypt, there's a hieroglyph that says received from the stars. And so it's implying that all of these temples were somehow received from the stars. And that's kind of eerie and interesting too. And I don't know if it was an astrological thing or if it was a potentially, an ancient aliens type of deal. So, but it definitely, there's two things you can count on in all these temples. One is these pillars that say receive from the stars. And then in the Sanctum Sanctorum, they have listed as being a Stargate. So, and showing depictions of the pharaohs receiving instruction from the Nibiru coming out of these Stargates. So, again, your interpretation is as good as mine on that, but it does seem to be pointing to something.
The pharaohs, as well as leaders, appeared to be religious or spiritual leaders as well, a priesthood.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. There's, it's funny. Really one of the pharaohs who set up the first schools in Egypt and who kind of solidified the priesthood of Egypt was the Pharaoh Tutmosis III. He's also the one that erected all the giant obelisks around Egypt, which we don't really know how they were able to move, to be honest. But there's a manuscript called the Thule manuscript, which makes it very clear that at the beginning of his reign, there were a bunch of flying discs that showed up in the sky. And they at first the people fell on their bellies and became confused by these flying discs that were in the sky. And then Pharaoh Tutmosis III caused incense to be burned to Amun-Ra. And then there was like fish and other things that came down from the flying discs onto the people. And that was a miracle they'd never seen before in Egypt, so they recorded it. And then it says the Pharaoh Tutmosis III was taken up into these discs to see the mysterious ways of the gods. And when he came back down, that's when he set up the first schools, and he started really structuring the priesthood in Egypt at the time. And again, it appears to be some sort of extraterrestrial intervention in that regard, as far as that early history of Egypt. But Egypt's a fascinating place because they have, on the one hand, it's very clear that the Egyptians discovered things. The dynastic Egyptians discovered things in Egypt that they didn't understand, that had been left there from a previous civilization, that really suggests high technology that was creating these things. And so on the one hand, they were trying to preserve all that as best they could. But then on the other hand, there seems to be this some sort of connection with certain star systems in particular, and everything in the Egyptian mythos was based around that. I mean, for example, the god Osiris was associated with the constellation of Orion. The goddess Isis was associated with the star Sirius, and there was a real emphasis on the Pleiades, the constellation of Taurus, particularly the fixed star of Aldebaran, which is the eye of Taurus, and everything was, their entire religious system was based around those particular constellations for whatever reason. And they even suggested that after the pharaoh died, that part of his preparation of preparing his body and everything else and was to prepare his journey to go to Orion itself. That there was some sort of a doorway through Orion that he would go through after life. So, whether that's just a spiritual journey or again, some sort of a connection with extraterrestrial entities from that region, it's anybody's guess, but the hieroglyphs and the mythology and the temples all seem to be pointing to some sort of a connection there.
If our Earth experiences a cyclical catastrophe, such as a flood or a pole shift, the most resilient structure, I imagine, would be a pyramid in which to preserve this knowledge.
Yeah, I would think so. There's debates on how old the Great Pyramid actually is in the Giza Plateau. Of course, mainstream archaeology likes to point to the Great Pyramid as being built by the pharaoh Khufu, which is almost laughable. There's 2 million stones in that pyramid, and for him to have built it during his reign, they would have had to have laid a stone every 20 seconds, for 20 years, which it just seems absolutely impossible. And the person who got credit for Weiss, who's the one who said it was Khufu's pyramid, he was a bit of a troublemaker. I mean, he got caught forging hieroglyphs on other tombs in Egypt using red ochre paint, and it just so happens that one night when he had sent his workers home, the next morning he announced that he had discovered Khufu's hieroglyphs in the Great Pyramid with red ochre paint up in one of the relieving chambers. And never mind the fact that it's spelled wrong, but I mean, it's kind of like, really? But this is what standard Egyptology uses as a basis for dating the Great Pyramid. But if you actually, it's funny, if you lay out the entire Giza Plateau with the Sphinx and the pyramids and the Sphinx Temple and some other things there, it actually perfectly aligns with the Orion constellation, but it does it during the age. It fits perfectly, which would be during the age of Leo, which is about 12,500 years ago, and what's more is, if you wanted to get it exactly perfect, it would have been from the age of Leo 2 times before that. So it would have been about 36,000 years old if that was the if we want to use that as the reliable source for dating it. There are unusual things at the Great Pyramid. You will find at the base of the Great Pyramid there's manatee fossils, for example, which is kind of interesting. I mean, it implies that there was water right there, and most of the platform that the Great Pyramid's on, people always look at the pyramid, but they forget that like the pyramid's actually on a platform as well, and it's composed of millions of stones that are all fit like a jigsaw puzzle. They're not like square stones. They're like they have like as many as 12 or 14 angles on them, and they're all fit together perfectly on the plateau of the where the pyramid rests up on top of. And I mean, just to do that, just to level the earth and know exactly where to do that, and to lay all those foundation stones down and everything. I mean, it'd be hard pressed to find any modern civilization who could even come close to doing that today. So it's a real enigma.
There are legends of King Solomon receiving a ring from Archangel Michael, which he subsequently used to command the jinn to build the temple.
Yeah.
Is there any basis of truth in this story? And if so, where might that ring be now?
I'll be honest, I don't know where that ring would be. I do think, though, that story is, some have interpreted it as, because you find that story in the Testament of Solomon, which is a Kabbalistic text which goes back, some would argue, as early as 200 BCE. But the other place we find that same story is actually in the Quran. And in the Quran, it talks about jinn being captured and made to do the work of building the temple. So then the question is, and the funny thing is, in the story in the Quran, it actually mentions how the jinn just kept working on building the temple, and King Solomon actually died. He was dead. He was sitting there in his throne dead, and a worm started crawling up his staff, and his staff, it caused enough weight for the staff to fall down, which then caused King Solomon's body to fall down, at which point then the jinn realized he was dead, and so they stopped working. And but that raises some interesting question about what were these jinn, or in the Testament of Solomon it's described as demons instead of jinn. But we have to question, was it a metaphor, and it is just a metaphor for how we have to take control of our lower nature, the elements of our lower nature, and to use those and put them to work towards building something good and holy for God? Or was it really actual demons that he was getting, or was it something else? Was it automata or some kind? Some people believe that the gray, what are known as the gray aliens, are really just automata, or they're biological robots. Some even think they may be avatars for beings in another solar system somewhere that they could project their their consciousness into to work, almost like a remote drone. But the fact that they didn't, if we accept this story literally, the fact that that there was some sort of a ring that controlled them, and then B, the fact that they didn't even notice that King Solomon was dead. It almost implies that they were programmed or something, to do this task, and they were just doing it. So I have not come across that ring. I wish. I don't know. Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
But I will say, from a Templar standpoint, that is not something that we do have a number of archives with some pretty cool things in them, but that ring is not one of them. So,
is it possible that the flying carpet motif somehow points toward ancient anti-gravity technology or knowledge?
I believe so. There's a Ethiopian text called the Kebra Nagast, which talks about King Solomon's flying ship, and that he would fly from Ethiopia to Jerusalem in a couple hours, which would normally take people several days to travel by foot. And he would go and visit the Queen of Sheba. It should be interesting, it should be pointed out, I guess, peripherally, that the word Sheba may come from Saba. And Saba was actually the ancient Egyptian word for Stargate. So the Sabaeans, the Sabaeans, which you find both in Ethiopia and in northern Turkey and Haran, they would study the stars. That was one thing that they were known for, was studying the stars. But their name in ancient Egyptian literally means Stargate. Saba means Stargate.
Wow. And
the fact that King Solomon used to fly in this device to go see the Queen of Sheba, there may be something there. Add to the fact that there are plateaus all over the Middle East, as far away as India, that the locals refer to as the Thrones of Solomon. And they do this, they call it this because they say that King Solomon used to land his flying craft on those plateaus. And the fact that you find that not only in the Middle East and in Jerusalem and in Ethiopia, but you also find it as far away as India, is pretty interesting. It suggests some local legends associated with that. In fact, Nicholas Roerich, who was he was a Russian mystic. He was an initiate. He was in fact, he was a spiritual advisor to both President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and his vice president, Henry Wallace. But Nicholas Roerich's the one who proposed that the Great Seal be put on the $1 bill in the American currency. And he also helped stop the Dust Bowl in America from using Mongolian planning techniques. And that's how he got to know Henry Wallace, who was the Secretary of Agriculture originally. But he also talked about, in his own writings, he talked about seeing flying discs in India clear back in the 30s. And long before Kenneth Arnold ever said anything about flying saucers, Nicholas Roerich was talking about them in Asia, in his travels through Asia. And he said at that time that the locals referred to these flying discs as Solomon's flying ship. So they thought that was King Solomon up there flying around, which is interesting when they see these flying discs. But even beyond that, from an alchemical standpoint, one of the things that King Solomon was involved with at the temple was he was demanding these these burnt sacrifices to God. And it's my opinion, and it can safely be said it's the opinion of the Templar tradition, that the reason why he was demanding these burnt sacrifices is he was extracting mana out of the ashes. Just like when Moses witnessed the burning bush, you have to, there's certain bushes in the Middle East that if you burn them down, you calcinate them down, you can extract this mana out of them. And what this mana is it's monoatomic atoms that are, it's actually, it's platinum metals that are in a monoatomic state. And so, and they naturally get absorbed into vegetation, and then animals eat the vegetation and it's in their body, and so on and so forth. So, but through calcination, you can burn things down to ashes, and then through a special process, you can extract these monoatomic atoms out of it. And what's interesting about these monoatomic atoms is that they, in particular, gold monoatomic atoms, which is how Moses burned the golden calf into a powder. He was burning it into the mana, which there's a special chemical process you could do that. But these monoatomic atoms, if you have a container filled with the monoatomic atoms and you have the same container filled with nothing, the container filled with the monoatomic atoms will weigh less than the container filled with nothing. It seems to be causing an anti-gravity effect, especially when it's subjected to a weak electrostatic or electromagnetic field. We think this is how they were able to move the Ark. The Ark of the Covenant would have weighed several tons, and yet 2 people could carry it with rods. And it's because it was an electrostatic capacitor. And of course, the Bible talks about mana placed in the Ark. So the mana, the Ark was built to hold the mana, and then the temple was built to hold the Ark, right? So this is what Solomon was doing. And there are other flying craft that are mentioned in the ancient world. In India, they talk about Vimanas, right? And in ancient Sumer, they talk about Shimanas, which were these flying craft of the gods, of the Anunnaki, the sky gods. So the fact that the commonality here is the word mana, right? And it seems to be it's this particular substance, I think probably has a lot to do with the anti-gravity effects of these flying craft. And I think the ancient myths were talking about this, alluding to this. Incidentally, you can also extract these monoatomic atoms from sea salt. Sea salt tends to have a good concentration of it. And of course, sea salt's found in ocean water, which is extremely sensitive to gravitational fields, hence why the waves happen with the moon. But there's also some believe there's even an allusion in the New Testament, the mythos of the New Testament alluding to this substance, which is why, because it's mana was also referred to as bread. So anytime the Bible refers to mana, white stone, or bread or salt, it's believed it was alluding to this substance. And in the story of Jesus, of course, he's born from the mother Mary, right? Mary or Maria means sea or seawater. So what happens when you heat seawater? A salt is born out of it. Immaculate conception, right? Sea, salt is born out of it, and each grain of salt under a microscope is a cube, and if you unfold the cube, you get a cross, right? And within that cross would be this mana, right? And of course, Jesus is born in Bethlehem, which means house of bread. So you literally have the Mother Mary giving birth to the manna, or the salt. Maria, again meaning seawater, salt, or sea, and then giving birth in Bethlehem, meaning house of bread, which was the other name for manna. So alchemists, there have been alchemists throughout the centuries who've looked to the New Testament and looked at things like this and saw alchemical operations being encoded in it once you understand the language. You find this mana all over the world, though, the ancient world. The Polynesians referred to it as manna. In the Tibetan traditions, it's referred to as mani. And in fact, there was even a Gnostic leader, early Egyptian Gnostic leader by the name of Mani, and he gave birth to the Manichaean sect. And he traveled. His followers were known to have traveled as far away as China. In fact, some people believe that the Ming dynasty even got its name from Ming, just means light in Chinese, and that there were so many Manichaeans in the Ming dynasty court, and they referred to themselves as the religion of light. But the fact that their leader's name was Mani, and you also find that name Mani as the name of the precious stone in Buddhism, sometimes known as the Chintamani, but it seems to be alluding to the same thing. In fact, the same thing. The Cathars, or the Albigensians of southern France, from which the Templars largely came out of, they were a Gnostic sect as well, and they had a ceremony that they used to perform called the Mani Sola ceremony, and it was basically their communion rite, but it seemed to be with some sort of mana substance, so for the bread. So you find it all over the world, which implies that it was probably all inherited from an earlier civilization, a pre-civilization, maybe a pre-cataclysm civilization. And but it also seems to be tied to the UFOs, and this may be why these UAPs are found also spending a lot of time in the ocean. You go down to the bottom of the ocean, all you find down there is white powder, which is probably these monoatomic elements, and I think that's what they're mining, and that's what they're doing in the ocean, because they can use it for their anti-gravitational abilities. Maybe a little deeper than you guys wanted to go.
That was
no, it's fascinating.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, why are the Templars choosing to emerge and share their knowledge at the same time disclosure is occurring? Is there some level of coordinated revelation here?
There is somewhat. It's time. I think a lot of it is we are destroying our planet right now. We're actually undergoing one of the largest extinction events for animals since the dinosaurs. And it's not talked about much in our media, but if we believe the religious texts, in the ancient texts, they all seem to allude to the fact that humanity was put on this planet to be gardeners and to tend this garden, and that Earth was meant to be Eden, where there was all these different animals and different species of flora and fauna, and that it was our job to be to tend to that, to be the custodians of it. And some would argue we haven't been doing a very good job, and that where things are kind of starting to fall apart. And if we're going to get to this next stage where we're going into space and potentially even joining in with a galactic community out there, we have to show that we can be responsible with our planet first. I mean, no one's gonna let us like go out there and destroy more planets, just because we destroyed this one. We didn't manage this one well, but we get to go destroy another planet somewhere. I mean, there has to be we have to get better at our responsibility here, I think, as we're also heading into space. And I think part of the Templar Order was originally founded to, everyone says it was founded to protect pilgrims on their way to the Holy Land. And that was the case, I mean, to a certain degree. Anytime a pilgrim leaves their hometown and goes into a foreign country, they see how the people in other areas are similar to the way they are. They find that there's a lot more commonalities than differences. And I think that certainly was part of the responsibility, was protecting pilgrims, so that they would have that experience and bring those experiences and that knowledge back to Europe to regenerate Europe, which at the time was in the Dark Ages. But really what the Templars were doing, what their real mission was, is they were connecting with the different Gnostic groups that were in the region, groups like the Druze and the Sabaeans, but then also the Bogomils in Eastern Europe, and certainly the Cathars, the Albigensians in southern France. And there was a Johannite Gnostic tradition that was being perpetuated in Constantinople, and they were connecting with all of these different groups with the understanding that these different groups were preserving aspects of philosophy from what was believed to be a pre-civilization that had existed before the flood, and that the flood that we talk about with Noah was the same flood that was Plato is alluding to in his discussion of Atlantis, that he had learned of from his grandfather, and that his grandfather had learned of from the Egyptian priests, and which are preserved on the Egyptian walls at Edfu, at the Temple of Horus at Edfu in Egypt, where the Templars also set up one of their preceptories. You can find Templar markers there to this day, but they were trying to preserve the philosophies, the history, and any technologies that may have survived from this pre-civilization. And so they were setting out to connect with these different groups in order to, because they knew they had enough in common. At its core, the Templar Order was really a Gnostic tradition. I mean, it was there's a reason why they used the Abraxas as one of their seals. That wasn't a Roman Catholic image. It was definitely Gnostic, And so, the Templar Order was concerned with consciousness. I mean, you can't be a Gnostic and not be interested in consciousness, because that's what it's all about. It's all about awakening to greater levels of consciousness. And they were interested in technologies from this potentially pre-civilization, and 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 tied up in all that in one way or another seems to be these UAPs. I don't think you can get around that. And so, we're now at a point where we've created pretty well a worldwide system where people have freedoms that they didn't have before, freedom to talk about things. We have the technology where we can communicate across the world instantly. And and so
we're doing it right now.
The fact that we're even doing this right now is like a kind of a miracle, right? I mean, they would think, go back 500 years, this would have been considered witchcraft or something. So we're very fortunate to be living in this time where we can get information out, and we can but I think part of it is there are certain perspectives within the Gnostic traditions in particular that point the way towards not only our deeper connection with that universal consciousness, but is directly tied to the recognition that we are in many ways stuck here until we figure it out. We figure out who we really are and where we really come from and what we're really about. And that includes, since that's the case, we need to take care of this planet that sustains us. And we have to be, because that's all a part of it too. And the animals are all part of it as well. And it's all, it's the way I like to say it is, it's all consciousness consciously becoming more conscious, right? We're living in this consciousness field. And I believe, just from my own exercises in interactions with UAPs over the years, they definitely have some sort of a consciousness technology interface in how they operate. I mean, I can't tell you how many times, just recently in the last couple of years, I've led 2 tours in Egypt where we started talking about UFOs, and within 5 minutes, in the middle of the day, UFOs showed up in Egypt that everybody saw. They're UAPs. I mean, one of them was, we were at the step pyramid of Zoser at Saqqara, and I read the Thule manuscript from Tutmosis III that I talked about earlier about the flying discs in the sky. And within 5 minutes, a bunch of UAPs showed up hovering over the step pyramid at Zoser and started flashing us, and everybody could see it. And they were there for only about a minute or two, and then they took off. But then the other time was we just opened we got the opportunity to go into a tomb in the Valley of the Kings that hadn't been opened in like 70 years, and probably less than 24 people had ever been in this tomb. And what was interesting about the tomb is it had a star map on the ceiling of the tomb where it was outlining the different coordinates of the sky, and the which Neters ruled which areas of the sky, and at what times, and where there's alignments, and so on and so forth. And so we were looking at that star map, and we came out of the tomb, and then three UAPs also showed up at that time, you know. And everybody saw them. We even filmed them. And but whoever they are, they seem to know that we're striving to connect with them, and somehow they know when we're talking about them. You know, I mean, one of the ancient terms for them was really the Watchers. You can see why they would be called the Watchers, because that's what they do. They watch us. But they seem to be willing to make their presence known when we have a sincere desire to connect with them. And regardless of what else they're doing, you know, I don't know if they're testing us or if they're, you know, getting resources from our planet, or I don't know, but one of the things they do seem to be open to is connection with us when we're open to that too. But it implies that there's a consciousness field that we're all operating in, and that our individual consciousness is just a small part of that. But somehow we're able to connect through that field. Hence why they show up.
So just curious, do you have a way to like share the videos of the UFOs from Egypt? Or
yeah, they don't look like much. They just look like I can get those for you, no problem. Because we had a number of people on the tour group that took the videos of them, but they look like they just look like flashing spheres.
Okay.
They looked like almost like I mean, they were high up in the atmosphere, but you could definitely see them, and they were moving around. But they were also just like these flashing spheres, almost these orbs, you know. And you couldn't really tell that they were like when you see a plane in the air, you can tell it's some sort of physical body.
Mm-hmm.
You know, these were almost more like orb lights, you know, but they were big, and they were moving around in the sky, and in erratic ways that didn't make a whole lot of sense. You know, they were triangulating us. There were three of them at different parts of the sky.
So I want to ask a couple more like historical kind of questions from the Templars, but I want to start out with using pop culture, because
Sure.
one of my I'm a fan of Dan Brown, his books, and they got turned into movies, Da Vinci Code, Angels and Demons, that kind of thing. How I got to ask, you know, when am I going to get this opportunity, right? How much like sort of truth is behind the Da Vinci Code, and how much I'm assuming you saw it, right? But you know, how much is like Hollywood filler or embellishments?
Sure. Well, there's I will say, so some of the characters in the Da Vinci Code are actually based off of real life characters. In fact, uh, there's a priest in the Da Vinci Code that's goes by the name of Saunier, and he was a real Templar initiate, who was associated with the Rennes-le-Chateau mystery. If you want to research Rennes-le-Chateau at all, Berenger Saunier was a real guy, and he was a priest. He was also an initiate, and he had amassed a large amount of wealth out of nowhere that he used to build up this parish area of Rennes-le-Chateau in southern France. And then his coffin was ordered weeks before he died, and then he supposedly died suddenly, and he had left all this money behind that no one knows where it came from. And then he had also he had done a confession right before he died where he whatever he told the priest he was confessing to, like the priest was totally appalled and and was visibly shocked, for whatever he was told. And there's been questions ever since of where did he get all this money? Was he blackmailing the church and that he got money from them? Was it money that was it ancient treasures that he had found on his property that was turning in, or was it something else? Was he doing alchemical work? Because he did have an alchemy lab, and so there's some speculation about something there. And then there's even speculation if he even really died. Some people think he faked his death. And anyhow, there's a lot more to that mystery. But Dan Brown, one of the characters in his book, is a guy by the name of Saunier for that reason. But the premise of course, his book is this idea that Mary Magdalene and Jesus had been married and that they had children. And I will say, from a Templar perspective, we do believe, based on so there's a tomb that's known as the Talpiot tomb in East Jerusalem, which was reopened back in I want to say the early 80s. And what they found inside were ossuaries. And what ossuary is, it's a box that bones used to go in. And each of these ossuaries were labeled, and they had names like Jesus, Mary Magdalene, and others. But it implied that this was had been the bones of this holy family, which included Jesus and Mary Magdalene and John the Baptist. I can say, from a Templar perspective, that tomb was originally opened clear back during the Crusades, and the bones were removed at that time, and they were taken, and they continue to exist in secret vaults to this day. We're hoping to reveal this soon, but the thing that was shocking, I guess, to your normal Christians would be that it appears that Mary Magdalene was married to John the Baptist first, and that they had children. And then when John the Baptist died, Jesus kind of took over his mission. And because Jesus was the cousin of John the Baptist, it was acceptable and within the religious canon or approval for Mary Magdalene to then marry Jesus, because they were of the same family. So it was not uncommon for a widow to then remarry someone else in the family. And so it appears that Mary Magdalene had married John first. They had children. John the Baptist died. Jesus took on his mission, and then Mary Magdalene married Jesus as well, and that they also had children. And so there's this line of lineage from Jesus and Mary, and also John and Mary. But what is special about it is not it's not that the blood has like secret powers or anything like that. The bloodline has secret powers, but rather that these lineages were passing on the actual doctrines of John the Baptist and Jesus and Mary Magdalene, which are more Gnostic in nature than the establishment churches have made it out to be. And for that matter, they represented Mary Magdalene appears to have been both Mary Magdalene and Jesus, for that matter, appear to have come out of the Canaanite Phoenician line, and this is why even Jesus's mother was able to be in the temples as a small child. I mean, the according to Jewish tradition, standard Jewish tradition, she wouldn't have been allowed to do that, but in the Phoenician Canaanite tradition, she would have. And that Phoenician Canaanite line, and it would also explain why Jesus, when he went to meet the Hebrew priests, they were shocked that he knew so much of their traditions, even though he had never grown up in their tradition. And it would be because he learned it all in the Phoenician Canaanite line, from which Judaism had originally come out of at one point in time. I mean, the Phoenicians were basically like the cousins of the Egyptians. In fact, even some Egyptian myths, Osiris was buried in Byblos, which was, of course, a Phoenician port city, and this is where the whole Canaanite line came out of, and hence this is also why the wedding of Cana between Jesus and Mary Magdalene would have been their wedding, and it would have been a Canaanite Cana wedding, and that would explain why Mother Mary was the one who ordered Jesus to get more wine, because she would have been the host of the wedding. So, but from a historical standpoint, this would be, this shouldn't shake up anyone's faith too much. It's just a different way of looking at it. But it also seems to suggest that Mary Magdalene was a high priestess of that Phoenician tradition, which was really just a reflection of the Egyptian tradition. And hence why there's so many things in the New Testament that Jesus was doing, which points directly back, which you can find in the earlier myths of Osiris and Isis from the Egyptians, because they were passing on that tradition. I mean, it also suggests that I mean, a good example of that is with the raising of Lazarus. People associate the raising of Lazarus as this miracle that Jesus performed, where he raised someone from the dead. Well, the ancient Egyptian priests, they used to perform a rite where the candidate represented the god Osiris, who was symbolically killed and risen from the dead. And Lazarus in Hebrew is El Asur, and El in Hebrew means God, and Asur was the ancient Egyptian name for the god Osiris. So you have Jesus raising the god Osiris, technically in in Bethany, which in Hebrew is Bet Anu. Bet means house, and Anu is the ancient Egyptian abode of the dead. So you literally have Jesus raising the god Osiris in the house of the dead, and which was an initiation rite. that was performed in antiquity, where the candidate represented the god Osiris. And so this explains a lot of things. It explains why Jesus waited to go get Lazarus. He asked, well, how long has he been in the tomb? And they tell him, and he says, okay, you can wait a little bit longer, then we'll go get him. It's not like it's an emergency. He had to go get him right now, but it also tied in with this is this Gnostic and Hermetic tradition that came out of this, which is why amongst the Nag Hammadi library, for example, where they found all these Gnostic and apocryphal texts of the New Testament in clay jars, much like the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. But they found them in Egypt, and they also found Hermetic texts in there as well, suggesting that they were looking at Hermetic and Gnostic ideas associated with this. But as such, then Mary Magdalene came to represent what was known as the Sophia, or the wisdom. Sophia was the goddess of wisdom, and according to the Gnostic text, she ended up wedding the Christos, which was the universal consciousness, and this is where gnosis got birth, or experiential revelatory knowledge of consciousness. And so Jesus represented the Christos, and Mary Magdalene represented the Sophia, and their marriage at the wedding of Cana represented symbolically how the individual soul can unite with that universal consciousness. And so there were these symbolic elements that were placed on the that were tied into all of this, that if we come to accept them, and this is what these bloodline families are passing down, as saying that they were the original expression of Christianity. If we come to accept them, then the story of Jesus is also each of our stories individually, and the story of Sophia is also the story of each of us individually, and that Jesus becomes the great exemplar, where he's exemplifying what it is to be a mouthpiece for the universal consciousness, the Christos. And Mary Magdalene, as Sophia, represents the individual human soul who incarnates into this world and gets attached to it and works its way through it, and eventually marries the Christos. And this is what the mystery of the bridal chamber is really about, that Paul talks about. So it's about our individual soul connecting with that universal consciousness, and that's where gnosis resides. That is within this sea of consciousness that we're all a part of, and it's that same sea of consciousness that the UAPs are absolutely tapping into somehow. So, and I think it's our destiny to be connected with. So, I mean,
okay, so I'm kind of hearing indirectly, or maybe even directly, that the Holy Grail, as it were, again going back to the Dan Brown movie, actually book, who did the movie? It was I forget what was the name of that guy. Ron
Howard.
Ron Howard, yeah.
Yeah, Ron.
Give credit where credit's due, right? Anyway, so it sounds like the Holy Grail is, in fact, the bloodline, as opposed to like a cup, or is that, or is it still more esoteric in nature of the story of the union of the body and the soul? Is it right?
I would say that the bloodline passes on the tradition, right? So when it's sangreal, that's the holy blood, the holy bloodline. So that definitely passes on the tradition. But the Grail itself, I would say, is also that connecting point between the individual consciousness and that universal consciousness. That's where gnosis resides. And in fact, it's even alluded to in the earliest Grail stories, like Wolfram von Eschenbach's book Parsifal, which was published in the 1200s. There's this relationship between what's known as the Grail King and the land itself. And so as the Grail King gets wounded and gets sick, the land becomes sick as well. And so it's only the Holy Grail that can heal it. So there's this as within, so without, or as above, so below relationship. And this is further emphasized by the fact that one of the characters in that story of Parsifal, well, first of all, it says that the Templars are the guardians of the Grail in that story. And then it says that it refers to the Grail as a stone that burns the phoenix to ashes, after which it comes back renewed. Well, that's clearly an alchemical reference, right? In fact, the earliest word Grail comes from ancient Sumer, and it was Graal, Gra.al, and that was their name for the alchemical science. So the fact that we find that in ancient Sumer and then it's being alluded to in Parsifal in the 1200s is pretty impressive that tradition was passed down. But the other things that it says, and there are two other important things that it says in there. One is that this so the Templars guard the Grail. There's also a character that's known as Trevisrent the Hermit in the story. And Trevisrent just means threefold knower. And hermit, the word hermit comes from Hermes. So Hermes, the threefold knower, is Hermes Trismegistus of the alchemical tradition. And he was credited with, amongst other things, writing what was known as the Emerald Tablet of Hermes, which begins as above, so below. Just what's being emphasized in the story with the Grail King. And one of the things that Trevisrent says to Percival in the story is he says, after he attains the Grail, he says, Percival, through your own efforts, you have changed God's law. In other words, he's implying that we are co-creators with God in this process, this consciousness field that we're living in, which is pretty profound. The other thing he does say is that Percival then he has a half brother who goes off and marries the Grail Maiden, and they move to India, and they establish the kingdom what was to become known as the kingdom of Prester John. And it said, and thereafter all the leaders of their tradition were named John. So it's implying a Johannite tradition that came out of all of that, which is pretty interesting as well. But it's and the other thing it talks about is it plays around a lot with the idea of balance, but it also says that the Grail, the other description of the Grail in that story is it says it was an emerald that was in the crown of Lucifer, and that when there was a war in heaven, when there was this war in heaven, the emerald got knocked out of the crown of Lucifer, and when it was brought to earth by neutral angels, and that this emerald is also the Grail, which I think is really alluding to that Emerald Tablet, in the alchemical instruction. So if you do that, the instruction on that Emerald Tablet, one of the things you're able to extract is the mana from metals, which is, of course, what's used to on all these flying craft. So it's all connected. It's just, it doesn't appear so at first.
Very much. I wonder if an emerald was perhaps in that ring of Solomon's. And I wanted to comment on this as above, so below, Mike. So that's a reference to the fractal reality that we're living in, the holographic reality. It's a
Yeah.
recurrent theme, and it's a very informing one.
Yeah, and it proves that there's a consciousness behind creation, right? It proves it proves that there's a creator. I mean, from a Gnostic Hermetic standpoint, the Hermetic doctrine was basically that that if you're God and you're all that is, and you want to create, well, there's nothing outside of yourself to create with. So the only way you could create is within your own mind, which implies that our entire reality as we see it is really just the mind stuff of the creator, and that we're in the mind of the creator.
Yeah, the only thing left to know and experience is what it's like to not know something. So I believe
Right.
that's what we're doing.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So yeah, I will say from a Templar standpoint, the Templar cross, like you see behind me here, it's an equal armed cross, but it's got the vertical arm and it's got the horizontal arm. And the vertical always represented the spiritual, and the horizontal always represented the material. And so the cross came to represent spiritualizing the material and materializing the spiritual. But of course, the only way you could do that is through consciousness.
Ah,
So it all goes back to consciousness,
yeah.
and really the gnosis or the revelation is about that experiential knowledge, and uh, and and that can come from a number of different ways, but one is certainly recognizing these patterns of as above, so below, and the fractal patterns of reality. And Dan Brown gets into that a little bit in I don't know if he gets into it in his Holy Grail book, maybe one of the others, but he certainly talks about the idea of like the Fibonacci sequence, and how you find that all throughout nature and how things grow. That's something that Leonardo da Vinci was certainly interested in. Uh, but it's proof that there's a consciousness behind creation, which means that there's a creator behind creation. And this is an idea that Pythagoras played with as well. And in fact, Pythagoras, he coined the term philosophy, right? Because the word philosophy comes from philo, which is to love, and Sophia, which is wisdom. So that goddess of wisdom that Mary Magdalene represented in the New Testament texts, who was Isis in the Egyptian myths, which is why just as Isis is the first to witness the raised Osiris after he's put back together again, after he's been killed, in the same way Mary Magdalene is the first to witness Jesus in his new form after the crucifixion. So yeah.
All right. Well, okay. So I had a question here that is perfect right at this point. So why did the Templars commemorate many of their churches to Mary Magdalene, and some on her feast, perhaps, or John the Baptist?
Yeah, it's because they recognized that first of all, John the Baptist was originally meant to be the great avatar, I guess, if you will, for the age, but he was killed early, and so Jesus took on the position. And so they they recognized John the Baptist as a voice of the Christos, the universal consciousness. Then when he died, Jesus took on that role. And it was also believed that Jesus passed that mystery on to Mary Magdalene. And so they were all embodiments of the Christos, the universal consciousness. And it could even be argued that, Leonardo da Vinci, he painted in his Last Supper, where the spot where John should be, he has Mary Magdalene, and this is John the Apostle, not John the not John the Baptist, but John the disciple. But what's interesting is in both the New Testament, in the Gospel of John, and in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, both are referred to as the beloved of Jesus, right? And there's been some people have even speculated that John of the New Testament was actually Mary Magdalene, and that it was an alter ego or something, or it was changed at some point in history, but they're both referred to as the beloved. And the difference is, it was very clear that Jesus had other relations with Mary Magdalene that he probably didn't have with John. So, yeah.
In that Last Supper painting, Peter is holding a knife and he's gesturing towards John/Mary's neck. I imagine you've noticed that.
That's right. Yeah. There's a couple things going on there. There's a hand coming out of nowhere going across the neck. There's also a dagger that's pointing at the abdomen of well, it's speculative, but you see the disciple with their hands like this while this dagger is being pointed at the abdomen. And I will point out that between the hand across the neck and the dagger at the abdomen with the hands up, these are 2 of 3 of the main symbols in the degrees of Freemasonry.
Right.
Actually, with what are known as the penalties of the obligation within Freemasonry, and one having to do with the throat being cut across, the other with the abdomen being cut across. So there are other things that are in that painting than most people realize, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm totally going to put that up when you're talking about it, the painting, and maybe highlight some stuff, so it's a little visual aid there. But
sure.
So if we can maybe shift a little bit to the treasure, right? What happened to the Templars' treasure when they were arrested and burned between 1307 and 1314 by Philip the Frere in France? And was the treasure material or was it spiritual?
It was both. It was actually 3 things. It was, on the one hand, the Templar wealth consisted of its property. So it had properties all over Europe, and they owned vast land areas, and they had buildings that they built all over Europe. When the Templar order was suppressed, most of those buildings were handed over to the Knights Hospitalier by the church. And the Knights Hospitalier later became the Knights of Malta. And so to this day, if you go to France, for example, and you see a Knight of Malta building, it was probably originally a Templar building. And if you go into the history of the building, you'll find out, yeah, actually it was a Templar building before it was handed over. So that was part of that was the majority of their wealth came from that. That said, there was certainly the spiritual treasure. As I mentioned, the Templars were a Gnostic tradition, and as such, they recognized that the sacred flame or the spark of God was within everybody, and they recognized that even other religions were started as a form of gnosis. There was a leader who had a Gnostic experience where they had some sort of a gnosis that was a revelation that was given to them, and then from that they created the religion for the territory and the community and the culture from which they lived in at the time. So the Templars had no problem associating with people of other faiths. They just didn't. In fact, and the Templar Order was started by people of different faiths. I mean, the majority of the founding Templars really came out of the Albigensian Cathar tradition of southern France, which were Gnostics. Hugh de Paynes himself had come from a Moorish background. His family line was Moorish, and they had been passing on some Moorish Sufi, what we now call Sufi traditions. The rule of the Templar was written by Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, who was a practicing Druid. Secretly, he was a practicing Druid, and he was associating with Rashi of Troyes. Rashi was a good friend of Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, and so when the original rule of 72 articles was created for the Templar Order by Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, each one of those articles corresponded to one of the 72 Kabbalistic names of God, from his, the connection with Rashi in the Kabbalistic tradition there. So right at the beginning of the founding of the Templar Order, you had Kabbalistic influence, you had Gnostic influence, you had Moorish influence, and Moorish mysticism influence, and you had Druid influence. So there was so the Templars, this is how they started out. They went to Constantinople. Hugh de Paynes and Godfrey de St. Omar went to Constantinople, where they were initiated and given their mission to start the Templar Order. According to Templar traditions, this is where they were meeting with leaders not only of the Eastern Orthodox Church, but also a secret Johannite tradition that was being passed down there through a person by the name of Theoclete. And so here we have Eastern Orthodox and Johannite Gnostic contributions, again, right at the beginning of the founding of the Templar Order. And then what did they do? They went and they got, they were able to get the Roman Church to provide funding for them, and to be a patronage for them. And that lasted until 1307, when the Templar Order was suppressed. The Roman Church said, okay, we're done with this. They accused them of all kinds of heresies. I mean, to be fair, the Templar Order was associating with Muslims. They were associating with groups like the Druze, which were Gnostic groups in the Middle East. And this is according to both Druze testimony and early Templar rules, where it said that they had special forms of recognition with the Druze and special relationships with them. So I'm sure all of this freaked the Roman Church out, that they were doing all this. They allowed them to do it for a period of time, because they were building the cathedrals for them. I mean, it was the Templar knowledge and funding that started to build the original cathedrals of Notre Dame. And even though these were beautiful big churches dedicated to Our Lady, Notre Dame, right, Mary, they hid in these cathedrals, which you can still see to this day, all kinds of alchemical knowledge. And you go to Shot Cathedral, they got Pythagoras there carved, in the cathedral, and astrological ideas, and heck, even the stained glass, you had to use metallic oxides to create those stained glass, which was an alchemical science that was known at the time. So, there's all kinds of things outside of the realm of standard Roman Catholicism that was being incorporated into these things. And so when the Templars were suppressed and accused of heresy, it was largely because of their associations with these other groups, these other religious groups that they didn't have any problems with. I will say, even these cathedrals of Notre Dame were built as a human body in form. So if you go to Notre Dame of Paris, you'll find that the baptismal fonts at the area of the belly button, the choirs at the area of the lungs, the priest speaks from the area of the heart, and the sacraments kept at the area of the third eye, which was also known as the Nazar in Aramaic, from which we get the word Nazarene. And that so what was so if that was Mother Mary, if the church was Mother Mary, and then when you leave the church, you go through the arch, right, which is the birth canal. So if the church is Mother Mary and you're being born from it, what does that make you? Makes you the Christ being born, right? Which is a very Gnostic idea that the Christos can be embodied by anybody, right? Because it's the universal consciousness. So these were heretic ideas. The Templars were able to incorporate into these things, and largely it came from their associates. So this was the spiritual treasure, right, that they preserved, this knowledge of what this religious tradition was really supposed to be about. And then there, of course, there was the holy artifacts that the Templars had acquired as well, in the Holy Land. I mean, one of the things that the Templars discovered, not only under the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, but then as they started traveling in Egypt and taking over the temples in Egypt, is they found there were arks, like Ark of the Covenant, right? But not just one. They discovered several of them. In fact, if you go to the Temple of Seti I at Abydos in ancient Egypt, there's a chamber there that's closed to the public. The Egyptian government keeps it closed to the public. But if you get the opportunity, like if you go on like one of my tours, I have access to this chamber so people can see.
I wanted to ask earlier, actually, is that open to anyone in the public who wants to go, or do you have to be a Templar to join those?
No, anyone in the public's able to go.
Awesome.
For sure. We do there. We culminate the trip with an initiation in the Great Pyramid, and that is only to people who have started the Templar journey. And so, if a member of the public goes on the tour and they're not a Templar, we give them the opportunity to join for $40, and they'll begin to receive the studies. But that'll also give them access to be able to be initiated in the Great Pyramid. So
wow.
We do that a few times a year. Templar initiation, same initiation that Napoleon went through, actually. there, and according to tradition, it's the same initiation that Jesus went through there. There's a Templar, a Johannite text known as the Vatican, which is a Templar Gnostic text, and it talks about Jesus receiving initiation in Egypt while he was there, and it would have been in the Great Pyramid, the same ceremony that we continue to do. But one of the tied to this, one of the things we show in this chamber at Seti I at Abydos is they show the Ark of the Covenant, what looks like the Ark of the Covenant in the chamber. They show it on hieroglyphs undergoing transportation. And then there's also Templar graffiti from the 1200s where they put 3 red Templar crosses around this image of the Ark in this chamber, because this is one of the areas where they found one of the Arks. So according to our records, the order found 6 Arks. They brought them, they were able to smuggle them out of between France and Portugal and Scotland. They were able to smuggle these things to the New World. And according to our records, originally that's what the Oak Island mystery was really about.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that too. So
so Oak Island was originally one of the Templar vaults, but everything was moved out of there in 1765. I mean, there might still be some coins or a few random things that they might come across, but all the major stuff was moved out of there in 1765 in preparation for the American Revolutionary War.
do you have any idea what kind of stuff would have been there?
Yeah, we have records.
Because I remember, I mean, I don't watch it anymore because they just kind of go on forever. But I love their efforts. But in one of their seasons, they were showing what looked like might be like a right angle, and they were speculating about an arc or something. Is it possible that there could still be anything of size or significant value there, or is it just like dust kind of stuff?
I think all the major stuff was moved out of there. There may be some silver bars or some things like that. I mean, according to our records, what used to be in there was 6 arcs. There was also a number of gold crucifixes. There was a menorah, a gold menorah. And then there were also these ossuary boxes with the bones of the Holy Family. And all of this, and then there was a bunch of other stuff too. There was descriptions of tubes made of crushed lime that held certain tapestries and other things. I mean, just it was a wide range of treasure. Most of it, some of that was used to pay for the American Revolutionary War, but the rest of it was all moved to 2 other vaults, which still exist at this time, where we know where they are. We hope to open one of them soon, actually. So, and now that we have the technology where we can show that instantly around the world, and we have the scientists that can test it. The main thing we want to make sure is that these holy treasures they're treasures for the whole world. They don't belong to any one country or any one religious sect. And even the arcs, they have an actual function, technological function, but beyond that, they have a symbolic value as well. From a religious standpoint, the arcs, you remember the descriptions of the Ark of the Covenant, it went into the Holy of Holies of the temple. And the temple was a was a macrocosm of the human body. And so where the Holy of Holies existed in the temple was at the area of the third eye on the human body, and hence why these are called temples, right? This is where your temple is, right? Because that's where the on a microscope, on a human level, what's in the temple is the pineal gland, which is your communication device with God, right? Which is what the Ark of the Covenant was also described as. So these arks symbolically represented that, even though they had a physical function as well. I mean, in the human body, the pineal gland, which would be the third eye, is it's like the radio receiver. It has it's like a crystal radio set. It actually has little crystals in it where it picks up on the vibrations of the environment, and based on that, it sends out primarily melatonin, which is the chemical messenger for serotonin with the pituitary gland, which then regulates all the other glands of your body. So it tells you how to adapt to your environment based on the signals it's picking up. And in the same way, the arcs were like these electrostatic capacitors, and they broadcasted electricity within the region. And that you have to remember, like Egypt was set up, the temples along the Nile, each of those temples were set up. The Nile represented not only the Milky Way, reflected the Milky Way above, but it also represented the spinal column. And each of those temples were set up, they represented a different chakra or psychic center along that spinal column. And they all had arcs in them that were all these electrostatic capacitors that were broadcasting electricity in the region. And you find them depicted in all of the major temples of Egypt, these arcs. And the same thing can be said for the one that was being built, that Solomon with his temple was being built. I mean, you have to remember the original tabernacle that housed the ark was like a tent that was made of wool curtains, right? Which was an excellent conductor for static electricity. And the ark would it was a capacitor, so it just build that up over time, and it would discharge it through the garlands on the top, that would appear as like the presence, And that's also why you couldn't touch the ark, because it would shock you to death, right? The Bible even describes like the ark was falling off of an oxen cart at one point in time, and I think that the guy's name was Ezra, and the poor guy just went to try to stabilize the ark, and it ended up killing him, because he touched it. So, but you could, the way you could discharge that electricity is you could take a rod, like Aaron's rod, put it in the ground, drop it against the ark, and it would discharge the electricity. And you find that same depiction being depicted on the walls of ancient Egypt. These Nibiru gods and these pharaohs are all depicted with the ark, and they all have these rods, for the same reason. So it was very much there are probably more of these arks all around the world. I believe that they may have even used to keep an ark in the Great Pyramid, and would broadcast electricity from the Great Pyramid. And later it became used for initiatic purposes. But all of this, I think, was designed to somehow be connected with these stargates, right? And these temples, which somehow allowed the pharaoh or the high priest to connect with what appears to be beings from these different star systems, particularly Orion, the Pleiades, and Sirius. So, at least according to the Egyptian, but you find that the Mayan as well, and other traditions around the world, ancient traditions.
If our Earth has a consciousness, then it makes sense that these other planets would have consciousness too.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree. And just from a quantum level, it's believed that our solar system originally came out of the Orion Nebula, and so we're connected to that. We're literally connected to that. Our solar system is on a quantum level connected with the Orion Nebula. So just at a quantum level. So there may be, other things going on there as well. It's hard to know.
Interesting. So can you give us maybe a timeline if you're comfortable with it, or like in terms of, you said you were sort of getting ready to soon kind of reveal some of these treasures for all. When might that happen?
I'm hoping it'll be sometime in the next few years. We have a couple obstacles to it. One is that the vault that we want to open can only be opened at certain times of the year because the ground is too frozen the rest of the year to be able to open it up. That's number one. Number two is I will say that one of the vaults is on an Indian reservation, and our indigenous brothers and sisters have been protecting that for the last 700 years. And so anything we do, of course, we want to make sure we involve them as well with opening it, because they'll have their own ceremonies and ritual that they'll want to do related to opening that. And so we have to negotiate that. And then the other thing is, that's not too much of a problem. I mean, we're already in contact with them, so that's not a problem. But we just want to do it we want to make it a celebration for all humanity. And then the other side to it too is we need to be able to, when we open it, we want to be able to broadcast it around the world while we do it, so that and we have to kind of do that. We have to kind of keep the location secret, obviously.
Oh yeah, I was going to say, on one hand, it's equal opportunity for all to see, but on the other hand, aren't you concerned that people would be trying to find that spot?
Absolutely. And there's other vaults. For example, there was a vault in Lebanon that was used for a long time. It's at a place it's actually in Tyre, at a place called Hiram's Tomb. And Hiram's Tomb you can find it, you can look it up, Hiram's Tomb in Tyre. But it's, they say it was King Hiram's Tomb. Well, it wasn't really King Hiram's Tomb. It was a vault where we used to keep things in, and everything's was moved out of there a long time ago. But there are other vaults around the world. There's one in Istanbul, for example, where there's still a artifact. It's a particular artifact that the Trojan War was fought over. It's called the Palladium, and that's still there in that tomb and in that vault. And I know where it is. The head of Turkish Ministries knows where it is. Antiquities, they know where it is. We kind of stay in contact. The Vatican tried to break into it a couple of years ago and steal it, and the only reason why they got caught was because there's the vault itself is underground, and it's in a granite box, much like the ones that are at the Serapeum in ancient Egypt, or in Egypt. But these boxes are they weigh about 100 tons, and they're made of dendrite, which is the hardest granite that you could ever try to work on. And in fact, it's in the ancient world they called it Zeus stone because it was so strong. But the this particular vault is below street level at a relatively busy part of Istanbul, and the Vatican had they had sent in some people who had rented they were staying at a hotel just down the street from it, and they dug a tunnel from their hotel room to this vault, and then they were using a jackhammer to try to open it up. And of course they could hear the jack, everyone at street level could hear the jackhammer. That's how they were trying to break into it, because the stone was so strong. And so that's how they got caught, and they got kicked out of Turkey at that point. But yeah, these things exist out there. It sounds like something out of a Dan Brown story.
Well, it does. I was going to say, how do they even build a tunnel like in real time?
They just dug it out. Yeah, they just dug it out under the street. Wow. I will say, I think this is kind of a conjecture on my part, but I think there's something to back it up. I think if you remember a few years ago when Notre Dame of Paris caught on fire.
Yeah.
Well, at the same time that caught on, at the exact same time that caught on fire, the area in Jerusalem, which was known as King Solomon's Stables, which is where the Templar Order headquarters used to be, that also caught on fire at the exact same time.
Really?
Which is really weird. And it's a really weird coincidence. And I tend to think that the Roman Church probably set both of those on fire, specifically because they wanted the places to be shut down to the public for a while, so that they could do archaeological excavations at both areas, because they're looking for these artifacts, and they think that, I think they thought they might find them at Notre Dame and also at the former Templar commandery in Jerusalem.
Wow.
And so by setting it on fire, and this is why they removed all the statues off the roof, like literally the day before the place caught on fire.
I didn't know about that one.
Yeah. And so I think what that does is it allows construction work to be done, restoration construction work to be done away from the public. And I think that's probably what was really going on there.
Wow. I'm speechless on that one. Wow. So actually, so well, before we actually get there, you sent in a couple images of, two images that were, not sure what to call them, like antiquity or, from a long time ago. We'll put them up on the screen, in our post-production process, but could we talk a little bit about those and like where they were found, and, what are we looking at here?
Yeah. So what we got is they're two images of flying discs, with angels, attached to them. One is from a Templar painting from about 1598. That was, so when the Templar Order was suppressed in 1307, and then Jacques de Molay was burnt at the stake in 1314, the Templar Order went underground in many different ways. They became according to the companions, who were the cathedral builders. They had two sects. They were known as the children of Saint Jacques and the children of Solomon. And these were the cathedral builders. Well, both of these groups say that they originally were the building force of the Templars. And so when the Templars went underground, they just became cathedral builders in these sects for a while to help hide things. But they also, the Templars also fled to Scotland, where they helped Robert the Bruce fight the Scottish War of Independence, and so they were able to hang out there and have safety. They also went to Portugal. They helped found Portugal originally as a Templar state. Portugal was originally port of the Grail. That's where it got its name from. And that so when the Templar order was suppressed in France, they just became the Knights of Christ in Portugal and kept operating. So there were all these artifacts went through these different areas, and but these were areas of survival. One of the other places they survived was in Germany, in the area that's now Germany, in the Tübingen region of the district of Württemberg, and of course this is where the whole Rosicrucian movement came out of as well at the same time. But it's really because the people who started the Rosicrucian movement were all underground Templars. They referred to themselves as the Militia Crucifera Evangelica in Germany, in this area of Württemberg. And Frederick, the Duke of Württemberg, was the Grandmaster. Queen Elizabeth I of England was also a member of this German Templar survival, amongst other people. And they published a book called the Neometria in 1598, which describes the dimensions of King Solomon's temple and how these dimensions actually correspond to Kabbalistic, Gnostic, and alchemical ideas. And they created a painting that still exists near Tübingen. It's hidden behind another painting, but this painting is it's what some would refer to as a tracing board. It's a giant painting. It's probably 8 feet by 16 feet. I mean, it's a huge painting. And what it has is the painting is all set up according to the Kabbalistic tree of life. And it shows the Princess Antonia, who was Frederick the Grandmaster's daughter, being initiated into the Templar tradition. And it shows throughout the painting, it shows her eventually becoming Sophia, crowned as Sophia by the end of the painting. But the whole painting's set up according to the Kabbalistic tree of life. So it's one of the earliest depictions of the Kabbalah in a painting, as far as I know. And it has all the Gnostic and alchemical ideas in this painting. And one of the other things it has in the painting, it shows King Solomon's temple. It shows Solomon in there. But it also has other people like Pythagoras and Nicholas Flamel and others in this painting. And the other thing it has in the sky is these flying discs with these angels. So this was a Templar painting of instruction, trying to teach all the different aspects of the Templar tradition and knowledge that was being passed down. Still exists to this day, but again, it's from about 1600 is when it was painted, and where it shows the disc. However, in the records, in the archives, there's also at the cathedral of St. George in Tübingen, you'll actually find in the sanctuary of the church, you'll find buried Frederick, the Duke of Württemberg, who was the Grand Master of the Templars, as well as all the other Templars that were working with him. They had themselves buried in the sanctuary of that church to ensure that the Roman Church couldn't use that building anymore, right? Because they couldn't, they'd have to step on their graves in order to to uh, to uh, to get the sacrament out of the sanctuary or out of the holy of holies. Wow. That's where they had themselves buried. So you can still go see that to this day, and it still has the Templar crosses on the walls and everything. But that particular area is not too far as where the painting is. But this is also where the religious stift is that people like Johannes Kepler and others all came out of. They were all studying in this religious stift in Tübingen. And this is also where the Rosicrucian movement came out of. So Johann Valentin Andrea, who wrote the Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz, which was one of the main early Rosicrucian manifestos, he lived in the town of Kalf, which is just right nearby, and his mom was the town alchemist there. And he was involved in this Militia Crucifera Evangelica, which was this underground Templar body. So that's really what that whole Rosicrucian movement that came out of that was about. And like I said, Elizabeth I, Queen Elizabeth I of England, was also a member of it. Queen Elizabeth's son that was hidden at birth was Sir Francis Bacon. And he was initiated into this tradition, and that's part of why he also wrote his book, The New Atlantis, which was a outline for all the technologies that had to be developed based off of what they believed was in Atlantis, in antiquity, and that the Templars were researching. so it was. So that was one of the great secrets that was going on in that area. But at that cathedral itself is also found the other picture that I showed you of the flying disc with the angel. And it's the black and white etching, and that was from ostensibly sightings of these flying discs that were seen in that area that the Templars were recording clear back in the 1600s. So wow. They were exploring a lot of things that are just now starting to come forward. There's even if you go to Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, which has been recently found. It was uncovered in, I think, in 1994 or something like that is when they first started uncovering it, maybe 96. But Göbekli Tepe is this ancient site that was the Sabaeans referred to as they referred to that area as the Hall of Records of Osiris, of the god Osiris. And of course, nearby there's actually like within a 10-minute walk from Göbekli Tepe, there's a whole other area associated with Göbekli Tepe that they're now starting to call Templar Tepe, because they've discovered a bunch of Templar graffiti there from the 1200s. Which means that the Templars were there too at Göbekli Tepe, already figuring all that out clear back in the 1200s. And they're everywhere. So they're everywhere. Yeah, they're doing all this research that's now coming out now.
Well, I was interested to know whether there's perhaps an esoteric level of meaning in the choosing of Friday the 13th as a day to arrest the Templars, and whether the Templars might be revealing something on Friday the 13th. Is that a sore point, or
no?
Has Friday?
I mean, I think. Well, you have you have to remember that the arrest orders for the Templars by Philip the Fair was originally issued in September of almost a month before the actual arrest. And so the Templars knew that they were going to be arrested, right? They found out they had spies and connections, and they knew. So what they did was they, of the 800 or so Templars that should have been in Paris at the time of the arrest, they only arrested a couple dozen. And that's because all the other Templars already knew that it was good. I mean, they all knew that the arrest was going to happen. Most of the Templars took the artifacts and the stuff out of the Paris treasury and the commandery, and they left on the boats, on their fleet of ships, which is why the Templar fleet disappeared the night before the arrest. There were other Templars, including Jacques de Molay himself, who stayed behind to just appear as business as usual, knowing that they were going to be arrested. And I'm sure Jacques de Molay thought that he would be able to talk his way out of it, or would be able to make some sort of negotiation with Philip the Fair and Pope Clement V. But that ended up not being the case. Pope Clement V wanted Jacques de Molay to merge with the Hospitalier group. Jacques de Molay refused on that because that would have taken away a lot of the freedoms that the Templar Order had, because they only had to answer to the Pope. So if they merged with the Knights Hospitalier, all of a sudden they would have to give up a lot of their freedoms and a lot of their ability to do the things they were doing. Now, why Philip the Fair chose Friday, October 13th, I don't know. I don't know if that was symbolic to him or even the church for some reason, but that became the date, and that's why it's considered an unlucky date. Friday 13th is considered an unlucky date even to this day. It's because that's when they were rounded up. The Templars were then tortured for 7 years. And then ultimately the Grandmaster Jacques de Molay, as well as Geoffrey de Charnay, the preceptor of Normandy, and others were all burnt at the stake in front of Notre Dame Cathedral. And yeah. But since that time now, Friday, the 13th of October every year has become a memorial day for Templars. And in most Gnostic churches, most Gnostic church lineages around the world, including the Johannite, particularly the Johannite Gnostic tradition, but other Gnostic churches as well, like the Ecclesia Gnostica in LA, or the Gnostic Sanctuary in up near San Francisco and Burlingame, and then other Gnostic churches, Old Templar Church in Chicago and other places. They all commemorate the Templars on the Sunday closest to October 13th. They have a Templar commemoration for that reason.
So there's, you sort of answered this already, but there's legends of the Templars suddenly amassing untold amounts of wealth and seemingly overnight. But was that more for Saunier himself, or because the way that I've, in my uneducated way, right, it was just the Templars at large that suddenly came into all this money out of nowhere.
Yeah, they did, but the theory is, there were two things. There were a couple things going on. One was, if you join there were a lot of wealthy, noble people who joined the Templar Order, and when they joined the Templar Order, they gave up their their wealth to the Templar order. They handed it over so that they could become a poor knight of Christ. So when you join the Templar order, you originally, this is not the way today, but but back then, you gave up all your material goods to the Templar order to help them with the mission. So they did have a lot of money from that. They also had a lot of money from, they set up the first banking system. So if you were a pilgrim and you were traveling from London to Jerusalem, for example, that's a long trek, and there were all kinds of people that would try to, there were ruffians who would try to steal your money along the way. They would attack you and steal your money. So it didn't make a lot of sense to be traveling with a lot of money on you, right? Because you're just setting yourself up to be attacked. So what the Templar order did is they said, okay, look, you can deposit your money in our London commandery building, and then we'll give you a receipt, basically a letter that you could then take to the commandery building in Jerusalem when you got there, and you could take your money out at the Jerusalem commandery, and we'll just charge you a small fee for it, right? Some interest for it. Well, that interest adds up, right? When you have thousands potentially of people doing that, I mean, the Templars amassed a lot of money for that. The other thing they did is they would loan money to kings with an interest, of course. The king would have to pay it back with interest. In fact, Philip the Fair owed the Templar order a bunch of money that he had borrowed. And that was part of the reason why he wanted to suppress him, is so he could get his money back and not have to pay back his debts. And then he could steal their money for his own purposes. So they got money that way too. That said, yes, it has been suggested that as the Templars started discovering certain knowledge that was at odds with what the Roman Church was promoting at the time, that the Templars, they only had to answer to the Pope. So they basically were told the popes at the time, hey, we have this, or we've discovered this thing that is at odds with what you're teaching. And it has been suggested that the Roman Church, that the Templar order may have even blackmailed the Roman Church to a certain degree for a while, and we're getting money from the Roman Church in order to keep their mouths shut. Right. Ultimately, though, these artifacts, they were a danger to doctrine, and some of them were considered, very holy artifacts. And so the Roman Church wanted them. And this is the real reason why, when the Templars brought this stuff over to the New World of the Americas, this is really the reason why Spain went crazy, came over here and started suppressing all the indigenous groups and everything else, because that's what they were looking for. They were looking for these artifacts. You have to remember, even the funding of Christopher Columbus. I mean, Christopher Columbus he had figured out what the Templars were doing, the underground Templars were doing, and that they were coming to the New World. And he went and he actually pulled one of the Grandmaster's daughters out of a convent, married her, to try to get information and maps of how to get to the New World. And then after he did that, to the King of Portugal and asked the King of Portugal to fund him to go to go to this new world. And the King of Portugal was like, no, we already know, right? They were already traveling over here to the new world. And so he's like, no, we're not going to fund you. And so then Christopher Columbus went to Portugal's enemy, which was Spain, right? And the Spain was a very Catholic country. And so, of course, Queen Isabella, she had just kicked all the Jews out of Spain that same year and was like, yeah, we'll fund you if you're able to find these artifacts. And so then what did Christopher Columbus do? He painted red Templar crosses on his sails because he knew that indigenous natives would recognize them. And he sailed to the New World and then tried to capture natives to get them to tell him where these artifacts were. And he was never able to get them. But that led to then thereafter Spain coming over and really trying to enslave the natives and stuff to get to. Then it became about gold. Eventually, it just became about obtaining all the gold that the indigenous people had, but they were still always looking for the artifacts that the Templars had brought over here.
Wow, that kind of puts a new spin on Indigenous Peoples Day. That's something that just recently, I don't know if it's anywhere else, but we do it here in SoCal, at least potentially the state, but it's something relatively new in the last couple of years. And, just makes me look at that differently. Yeah,
for sure. Well, you know how Columbus Day came to be originally? It was basically under President Harrison, back in the day. There was the Italian community had gotten in a huge fight with the Irish community in New Orleans, and the Italian, there were some Italians that had killed an Irish police commissioner, and which led to all these Irish riots, and ultimately it led to the Irish killing a whole lot of Italians, a whole lot of Italian families. It was really bad. And then it got to the point where the Italian ambassador was visiting the United States and basically said, if you don't give reparations to these Italian families, Italy's going to declare war on the United States. And so President Harrison was like, well, okay, yeah, we'll give reparations. We'll take care of that. And then the Italian ambassador said, and we also want there to be a holiday for the Italian Columbus. And so he said, sure, no problem. So he created Columbus Day, just to ensure that we didn't go to war with Italy. So that was the origin of Columbus.
Didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, but I mean, there were obviously there were Templars that were coming over here long before Columbus. I would say by the time Columbus had come over, the Templars had already mapped all of North America. And if you follow the work of Scott Walter in his show America and Earth that he did with the History Channel, he certainly found a number of Templar-based artifacts around the United States, including stones and the Newport Tower. He did stuff with the Newport Tower and other things, but all throughout the United States, in particular, there are artifacts that were placed by Templars, including the Kensington Runestone in Minnesota, which was placed as a land claim for the Templars to create a new Templar free state in North America.
Uh-huh.
And so, and they worked with the natives to do it, including certain tribes in particular, including the Mi'kmaq, the Mandan, and others in the more northern part of Nova Scotia area, and others, which is why the Mi'kmaq to this day, their flag is identical to one of the old Templar battle flags, which you can't explain otherwise, but it's because of the associations that they had there. So one of the Templar artifacts actually that's worth looking into is there's a figurine that was found on Baffin Island up near Nova Scotia, and it's almost like a little action figure size guy. It's a carving from the 1200s. It's been carbon dated, and it's a carving of a Knight Templar, with his full, including having his coif and his tunic, and there's a cross on the tunic, and it was carved by, they think, one of the Indian tribes there on Baffin Island, but it dates from the 1200s. So, and it's in the museum there in Baffin Island. And if you look up Baffin Island Templar figurine, I'm sure you'll be able to find it online. But it's just another one of those things that is proves that the Templars were here clear back then in the 1200s, because here's a figurine carved of a Templar that was carved by one of the indigenous natives in the region, that's now in a museum, and you can see it for yourself. So there's lots of things like that. The history is kind of ignored, but there's really something to it. So yeah, and all of that has remained preserved, and with the exception of some of the treasure was used to fund the American Revolutionary War. And I can say that definitively. My great grandfather, 7 generations back, was General Joseph Warren of the American Revolutionary War. He was the one who planned the Boston Tea Party, and he was a Templar, and he was his brother John Warren, which would have been my great uncle, was the first Grandmaster, Masonic Grandmaster of Freemasonry in the forming New Republic, and then Joseph Warren, my grandfather, was a Grand Commander of the Templars at the times, and he initiated Paul Revere and other people. So that was definitely all part of what was going on at the time. So yeah,
that's incredible.
Yeah.
So to wind things down a little bit, just a couple more questions. And you graciously provided a whole bunch of images that we're going to put up after our guest Stuart and I always do like a little debrief between us. But then after that part, we're gonna show those images. And I had also created a little musical interlude to go underneath it, so we don't have to deal with copyright. But one of the pictures that show towards the end there is, yourself and some other people, guys dressed up, and you're in a room, and it's a little bit blurry. And when I asked you about that, can you just remind me and just say publicly what? Because I felt that there was a significance to that blurry. So
yeah. So that particular picture is a number that was from 2011. I was initiating certain world leaders and leaders of different aspects of the Templar tradition in the Great Pyramid on November 11th, 2011. In fact, if you Google November 11th, 2011, Great Pyramid shuts down, you'll find all kinds of articles by the Guardian and others saying, trying to speculate that there was some sort of Masonic like rituals rumored to be going on inside the Great Pyramid. Oh, that was actually me initiating these people, but the photo is of us in our Templar robes in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid, but the photo is blurry because all the photos turned out blurry, even though they were being taken with digital cameras. They all is something about the energy in there. I think it was right after we had done our initiations in there, and the energy was really high. There's also in a number of the photos you see all kinds of different orbs and stuff in the photos, and we just couldn't get as much as we tried to get a photo that was clear. We couldn't get any clear photos in there at the time. So yeah, so you'll see that in the photo.
That's pretty wild. So I'm curious, did the room feel differently, or was it just something that happened in the photo and it was just like being in any other room?
No, I will tell you that when we do those initiations in the Great Pyramid, how we put this, we there's a certain point where it's almost like the walls disappear in the King's Chamber, and there are other beings that appear to be there, and I don't know if they're from another solar system out there, or if we can't really we can see them, but you can't it's not like they're physically there, but the energy is super high. And so I don't know if it's almost like a holographic image, or I don't know what it is, but whenever we do these initiations, it's not uncommon for that to happen. And then after the fact, the energy is just crazy in there, and I think that's what's affecting the photography.
So are they like humanoid in like outline or appearance,
they're humanoid in appearance. They look human, but there's some characteristics that are a little different. They seem to be taller, and they seem to have bigger eyes. But otherwise they look human. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. So thanks for that. I was kind of curious. Another question about the photos in the one that I think second to last. I felt it was pretty significant. Originally, I thought it may have been one of these arcs, but now I'm wondering if maybe it's a door of a vault. I don't know if it's the one with the circle. There's like a circular handle, and it looks like a brass and a gold, with a triangle.
Oh, it's got the eye in the triangle, the square, and the circle.
Yeah. Is that?
Yeah. That's
I'm
actually
just curious if
it's actually like this right here.
Yeah, it's similar to that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the doorknobs of a secret Templar church in Germany, where the Militia Crucifera Evangelica was, and those doorknobs are from the same time period as when that painting was made, where it has the flying discs. So the doorknobs are to a secret church where that painting is actually kept. So those are the doorknobs from the early 1600s. Yeah.
It looks beautiful.
They still exist. We still use those doorknobs to this day on that church. So
nice.
Yeah. It's in the Black Forest there in Württemberg territory, of which, by the way, is also where if you remember, that's where Martin Luther was hid as well after he nailed his 95 thesis on the church door. He went into hiding in the Black Forest there in that same region.
So Timothy, I want to thank you for your time and visiting with us today. I really do appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. And I've got one sort of closing question for you. Actually, two closing questions for you.
Okay.
I forgot about the other one. The first one would be, what would your advice be to any spiritual leader out there who might be listening to prepare their community for not only the ongoing UFOs, UAP disclosure with the American government, as it were, and potentially some others, but also, now the Templar disclosure that seems to be coming up pretty soon. What would you say to all those folks?
I would say it's all related. It's definitely all related. It may not seem related at first, but the more you look into it, you'll see it's related. And again, I would just stress the idea that these UAPs, there's lots of conjecture about where they're coming from. If they're coming from another solar system, or if they're interdimensional beings, or if they're time travelers from the future. These are all possibilities, or maybe a mix of them all. But I would say that there's no evidence to suggest that they're here to harm us, number one, because if they wanted to really hurt us or destroy us as a civilization, they wouldn't wait for us to keep getting more and more advanced before they did it. Right. And two, from a Templar perspective, we tend to call them our cousins, that we are related to them, even genetically, and that they want to see us succeed, but we're not going to be welcome into a galactic community of any kind until we can start getting along with ourselves down here first. As long as we're committed to blowing ourselves up and hurting our environment, why would they allow us to take that out to other planets? It's they wouldn't. So I think part of the reason why they're showing up right now too is because they care about our planet. They care about us as people, but they also care about the animals that are on this planet that we're preserving, and that we have a responsibility to help take care of. And it's only when we're able to show that we can do that responsibly that I think, with our developing technologies and maybe even new technologies that they'll provide to us, that we will then be able to journey beyond this planet into other planets around the universe.
Wow.
That's just a Templar take on it,
Well, it's very similar to sort of what we've been postulating here, almost in every episode, or as the conversation's been evolving. It echoes a lot of what we've talked about. Some of it's new, of course, but yeah, that feels kind of right to me. I'd say that we here agree with you and the Templars' view. So my final closing question here is going back to the beginning when you were talking about with you and your team being approached by NASA to do remote viewing, specifically for what year is open contact. I know you said that they didn't give you the results, and that's I kind of understand how that part works. But you personally, I'm curious, what date did you come up with, if you don't mind sharing that?
I came up with May 2026. So, wow. Not too far off from now. I don't know what that means. I don't know if it means there'll be a bunch of UFOs coming in and saying, all right, we're here, let's start talking, or if it's something more, or I don't know. I don't know what the necessity, what brings that about. I just know that was the date that rang out for me. So it was May 2026. So
Okay.
And again, I don't know what other people said, because they collected all the results and didn't tell us the commonality. So but I do think it's right around the corner.
It definitely seems that way. I mean, there's a lot of things, as you know, going on throughout the world that definitely do seem related, especially after you look into it a little bit more. Well, is there anything else that you might want to toss out there with us here that you've never ever said anywhere publicly?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that our destiny as humans, and I think their destiny as extraterrestrials are the same, and we have to remember that they're really wanting the same things we are. They're searching for the same things we are, and there's an interesting period in ancient Egyptian history where there was a new pharaoh known as Akhenaten, who was King Tutankhamun's father. And one of the things he did at the time was he totally changed Egypt, and he said that he said, stop worshiping the gods, because the gods are just your cousins, basically, and instead worship the Aten, which is the one God. And that word Aten, or my Aten, in ancient Egyptian is Atenai, from which the Hebrew word Adonai comes from, for Lord. But I think that's where we're going, and we have to remember that these beings that are coming here in these craft that have technology that is beyond our comprehension right now, that it's important that we don't look at them as like gods that we need to worship, because again, they're really just our extended family, and that ultimately they are trying to understand and connect with that same universal consciousness that we are, and that's where some of their technology is definitely homed in on. And so I think that's just important, that you can keep your spirituality or your religion, whatever it is, and still engage in this mystery associated with them. That's the only thing I'll say about that, I guess.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again so much for your time.
Thank you.
Definitely appreciate it.
Much love to you, sir. Can you tell our audience, please, where people could find out more about you and potentially connect with you?
Sure. I've written several books that you can find on Amazon, which cover a lot of these esoteric sciences associated with all of this, in terms of Kabbalah and Gnosticism, Hermeticism, Templarism. I do have a book called The Way of the Templar, which gets into Templar philosophy, but also history, the secret history. So you can find me on Amazon. You can also find me on Facebook and on Instagram. And I do have a YouTube channel as well. But I don't promote that as much. So, but you can find me in all these areas. And then you can also find me on Gaia, the Gaia Network. I co-host a show, Mysteries of the Knights Templar, with Scott Walter, and you can find that on Gaia. There's another series called Secrets of the Knights Templar, which you can find on YouTube. That was produced by Zohar, Zohar Stargate Productions out of the UK, and you find me on there as well. So lots of places you can find me.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both. Keep doing the great work.
Reverend Stu.
Wow. Okay, that was really incredible. I'm amazed by how generous he was with his time and knowledge. I'm absolutely in awe of that man. And so much information about UAPs and UFOs, far more than I was expecting from him.
Yeah, I'd have to say the same. Originally where I was thinking, we'll interconnect it. No, I wasn't expecting so much UFO conversation, as it were. But what a wonderful thing, right? And it, in a way, it kind of teased things up a bit for where we have planned to go next season. But we'll talk about that some other time, because I want to just really reflect on what we just heard and the significance of it, quite frankly.
Yeah, it's going to take me a while to absorb that. Now, the world leaders being initiated in the pyramid, so many fascinating threads I could have picked up on, and we probably would have ended up speaking for 5 hours, which I would have enjoyed, but we've got to be sensible at these things.
Yeah, exactly. We maybe we can do another round at some point in the future. That might be interesting.
I'd absolutely love that.
Yeah, so to kind of close it up, I mean, on one hand, I kind of think maybe we might do one more bonus episode between us, separate from this, to talk about the evolution of the larger conversation of all episodes and the things that we've sort of discovered, as it were, or I don't even know if that's the right way to put it. But anyway, to just kind of end this one out, ending this particular episode and officially ending our first season, we want to go out in the Templar style, effectively, and by doing that, Timothy has sent in a bunch of images that he approved for us to put out there in a form of a slideshow. And I had asked him about that because when I was doing research before we were, meeting with him, I immediately said, to Google, like, is there a Templar's Anthem? Does such a thing exist? And to my surprise, there is a Templar's Anthem, and I already knew it. We actually sang the song in my high school, which makes me wonder potentially about some of the people who taught me in my formative years. But nonetheless, this is going to be an instrumental version that I, in part, created. And it was finally mastered by our mutual friend, Russ. And it's called Non Nobis Domine. And that's officially the Templar Anthem. Timothy was saying that they typically close their meetings by singing that song. This one's doesn't have any vocals, but melodies are beautiful. And you're going to see some Templar images, and I think potentially some of these images have probably never been public. I don't think.
Wow, Mike, you've done a stunningly good job on that instrumental version too, I must say.
Thank you. It's the official Mikey Mike Orchestra. But anyway, why don't we just say to everybody out there, thanks for tuning in so far. If you haven't caught all the episodes, we have like plus or minus 50 hours, 50, right, of great conversations with all kinds of people all over the world. And you can binge upon those as you're traveling about through the end of the year, and wish you all the very best. And we'll be back at some point soon, potentially mid to late January.
Okay, that's fantastic, Mike. And if we do this last episode, which we'll shoot later on, we can talk about the direction we're going in next season.
Exactly. So for now, thank you so much. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your year. And please do enjoy this slideshow and musical presentation.
Much love for the holiday season.